We have all heard the story that Jesus is soon to come, but a lot of people are kind of apprehensive about his second coming. On this journey, we're going to read a book called Raptured.
They're going to see him on that day that is yet future. Revelation 1:7 says, "Look, he's coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn because of him, even the people that pierced him."
1 Thessalonians 4:17 through 18 says, "Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words." Personally, I can't wrap my mind around the fact that a trumpet is going to sound so loud that it's going to raise the dead. But the Bible tells us that this is going to happen. The question now becomes, are you ready? There are various artists out there who have tried to capture what it would be like once we're caught up to be with the Lord in the air. My third grade teacher, who is now my godmom, is responsible for me taking this journey because she specifically recommended that I read this book, Raptured. It is so necessary that we keep this message top of mind. Come along with me as I read. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. And welcome back. And for the month of April, I have been inspired by my godmom to read. Man, she had me to order several books. Okay, so this book here is probably the shortest one. And the Lord dropped in my heart to actually share this with you guys because after I read the first chapter, I was like, you know what? There is no way that I'm moving forward without sharing the rest of this book. So, in chapter 2, we had Hester and Nancy. They went down to the Fairview Church and they are listening for a message about the Great Tribulation. And Nancy was invited by Hester. And so we have a couple of characters here who are apprehensive about being saved wholeheartedly. And, so they have some drawback. But um, I just want you to go along with me as we continue with the book Raptured by Ernest Angley. And this book was written in 1950. Okay, go figure. So I try to be as obedient to my parents as I can. Okay. I have quite a few godmoms, but when Miss Mother Ware calls and said, "Hey, I need you to order those books," I did it right away. And on that note, we are going to go on and get back started with reading chapter 3. And it says, Lucille was sick during the night, and baby Sue restless, crying frequently. Jim, too, lay awake for hours. Lucille suffered intensely at times, and Jim tried various home remedies to relieve her discomfort. Occasionally, he went to the nursery to look in on baby Sue. Now, just to give you some backdrop of what happened, Lucille went off so bad on her mother-in-law because she was trying to share the gospel with her. And so she did her so bad that the mother-in-law left in tears. And Jim, who is the son, he was so hurt because his mom told him, hey, you probably should pray for your wife before you get married. You need to ask God to send you a good wife. And you couldn't tell him anything. He knew he wanted to marry her, and here we are. And so now her mother-in-law is trying to share the gospel with her, and she has left, and she lives down the street, matter of fact. And so now she is up against this sickness, and she's calling for her mother in law. And said the night seemed endless, but at least the dawn came. About 6 o'clock, baby Sue stopped crying. Jim was so busy trying to comfort Lucille that he did not check on baby Sue after her fretful crying had subsided. Lucille's pain had become more severe as the hours passed. Jim would have gone for his mother during the early part of the night, but he hated to waken her, especially after Lucille had talked so disrespectfully to her Sunday afternoon. Of course, his mother would have come. He was sure she held nothing in her heart against Lucille. Nevertheless, he would not go for her until Lucille asked him to. She always wanted his mother when she became ill, and he felt Lucille would call for her soon. She held she had to she had told Jim more than once that his mother knew just what to do to help someone in pain. What time is it, Jim? Almost 7 o'clock, he answered as he came closer to the bed. I wish you would go get your mother. I'm in a great deal of pain, she said in a low voice. At last, Lucille was saying what Jim had been listening for. All right, sweetheart, I'll go. As he went for his hat, Lucille called after him, hurry, Jim, I'm so sick. Maybe she'll know how to help me. Jim passed by the closed nursery door without stopping to look in on baby Sue. He would have, but Lucille was in such pain that he wanted to hurry. Had Jim's mind not been so preoccupied, he would have listened to the excited newsboy on the opposite corner, but he passed without giving him so much as a glance. Mother would be up by this time and the house spick and span with everything in its place. Mother would be in the double window in the old armchair reading the Bible, the book that had been so familiar to him during his childhood. Yes, Mother would have already prayed her early morning prayer. He was so glad he had a mother who knew how to pray. He could see her in his imagination with her silvery hair bent over the holy book. As he came within sight of the house, he did not see her at the window. He hoped his mother were not sick too, especially with Lucille so ill. As his foot touched the porch, he began to call, Mother, Mother. It was not unusual for Jim to call his mother before he got inside the house. That was one of his old boyhood habits. Lucille had scolded him often and told him it was not good manners. But Jim continued to do as he had always done since he could remember. This morning, there was an urgency in his voice as he threw open the front door and called, Mother! Mother! All was quiet. If Jim had not been in such a hurry and so concerned about whether his mother was sick, too, he would have noticed the peculiar atmosphere in the room. On into the dining room and kitchen he went, calling, Mother, where are you? As he strained his eyes looking out the kitchen door, trying to see if she were in the garden, it came to him like a flash. If she were sick, the bedroom was where she would be. Why hadn't he thought that sooner? He made a dash for the bedroom. Mother was not there. It looked as if someone had begun making the bed but had only put on the sheets. The quilt was dropped about halfway to the floor. Jim's frantic eyes searched the room, but without consolation. It seemed as if someone plunged a dagger into his heart as the words his mother spoke yesterday came back to him. Go over to my house and find me gone, Oh no, he cried. Please, God, not that. I couldn't bear it. Then, trying to fight the rising panic, he said aloud, My, my nerves must be about shot from lack of sleep. However, he couldn't convince himself for the words, The rapture has taken place. The rapture has taken place, kept hammering in his brain until Jim thought if it did not stop, he would lose his mind. Suddenly, for the first time, Jim noticed the strangeness in the room. And as he looked down beside the bed, he saw his mother's clothes and glasses lying on the floor. A death like chill spread up his spine until it seemed to be choking him. No, no, it can't be, he rasped. I won't believe it. My mother can't be gone. Please, God, he begged. If the rapture hasn't taken place, I'll I'll get right with you. I make a vow, he continued, tears blinding his view on the room. If the rapture hasn't taken place, I'll go to the next service and surrender my life to you. Some powerful magnetic force seemed to draw Jim to the living room. On the table lay Mother's black Bible. It was open, and as Jim stared at the pages, the underlying scripture leaped to his eyes. Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Matthew 24:44. Cold sweat beaded his forehead. He cried, It's happened! It's happened! My God, the rapture is taking place and I've been left behind. My mother is gone. With tears flowing down his cheeks, he collapsed on the floor and wept bitterly before the Lord. How long Jim cried and prayed, he never knew. Butch, his mother's dog, scratching and whimpering at the front door, at last brought Jim to his feet. Slowly he opened the door, fell on his knees, threw his arms around Butch's neck and wailed, She's gone, Butch, she's gone. Butch nestled a cold nose to Jim's face, as if he understood. Suddenly, Jim thought of something which brought him to his feet. With a jerk, he dashed down the walk and out the front gate like a madman. No, no, he kept saying. I pray God you haven't taken my baby. It's enough that my mother is gone, but you can't have Sue. She's mine, I tell you. She's mine. His feet just would not move fast enough. Was he dreaming? He had nightmares of trying to run before, but being unable to move. Could this be one of those dreadful dreams? He had not heard baby Sue cry since 6 o'clock. A great storm of thoughts rushed through his mind as his feet pounded on the pavement. The wind blew his hair into his eyes, stinging them dreadfully, but he barely noticed. He burst into the front door as if pursued by a legion of devils. Not giving Lucille a thought, he ran to the nursery and threw it open. The crib was empty. He stood speechless, riveted to the spot. He tried to move his lips, but words would not come. He tried to go toward the crib, but he did not have the strength. Lucille called frantically from the bedroom. For the moment, it did not seem to matter. Mother was gone, and now his precious baby disappeared. He would give anything in all the world to wake up and find that he had been dreaming. But it was not a dream. The rapture had really taken place. Never again would he tiptoe to a nursery door and peep in at a mass of golden curls lying on a soft white pillow. My God, he murmured. Why didn't I make preparations to meet you? What a fool I've been. Lucille kept calling, Jim, Jim, is that you? She wondered who could have rushed into their house with such slam, bang, wild thumping footsteps. Surely Jim would not come into the house in such a rage, especially when she was sick, unless something terrible had happened. What could have happened? Or was it someone else? Could her child be in danger? The thought of her child being threatened renewed her strength. Although in great pain and weak from suffering, she managed to slide out of the bed. Step by step, she crept breathlessly, making a little noise as possible, as little noise as possible. Each step sent fiery pains through her body. After what seemed hours, she reached the nursery door. A man standing in the room with his back to the door startled her. Then she recognized him to be her husband. Jim? She gasped, a shrill edge to her voice. Every nerve in her body was screaming. Hearing his name brought Jim back to the reality of his surroundings, a whirling around him simply groaned. When Lucille saw Jim's pale, drawn face and his glassy eyes, she was sure that something horrible had happened. But what was it? What is wrong, Jim? She demanded. They're gone. They're gone. And the tears began to flow again. He had wanted to spare her from learning about the baby until she was well. But two shocks so close together were more than he was able to master. He just blurted out the news and then stood there and cried as if he had no power to stop. He was unable to speak further for some time. Who's gone, Jim? Tell me. Get control of yourself. I've never seen you like this. Our baby is gone, Lucille. Can't you understand? Our own precious darling is gone. He was finally able to tell her. Lucille was so weak. She had sat down on a stool at the side of the door, but panic brought her back to her feet. Gone, she cried wildly. Where is she, Jim? Oh, Jim, call the police. Our baby has been kidnapped. I told you I was afraid for her to sleep in here by herself, but you said it wasn't good for a child to sleep with his parents. Now you see what has happened? She sobbed. Jim stood without saying a word. Nothing seemed to matter, not even an outburst from Lucille. Jim, call the police, she cried again, but Jim did not move. Lucille staggered to the telephone just outside the nursery door and dialed police headquarters. Lucille, the rapture has taken place, Jim stated, controlling his voice with great effort, for his brain was going in wild circles. Only the world had stopped turning. As far as Jim was concerned. What do you mean? Lucille cried as great fear began closing in. Lucille, do you not understand? The Lord has come. Mother is gone. Our baby is gone. Thousands of others have disappeared. You and I have been left behind, he choked. You remember, Lucille, you told Mother yesterday never to mention Rapture to you again? Well, she won't ever trouble you now. The word rapture loosed his tears again. But he went on. Maybe you'll be satisfied now. She's gone. She's been caught away to be forever with the Lord, and baby Sue is with her. Do you understand? Harshly, he continued. You said you didn't believe in the rapture. You made light of the whole idea, but it has happened, and they are gone. Things grew dark before Lucille. Her head began to whirl around and around. She tried to sit down, but instead collapsed, falling at Jim's feet. He stared down at the crumpled heap without moving, his brain so numb from shock that he couldn't think of anything to do to help her. The woman from the house behind them began to scream, "My children are gone! Help! Help! Something dreadful has happened to my children. Please, somebody help me." Jim was too absorbed in his own trouble to be of any help to anybody. Oh, if only I had made the rapture, he said aloud. I had so many opportunities to get right with God, but I put them all off. I thought I had plenty of time. As he stood numbly over Lucille, thinking of his past, he was reminded of the many times his mother had given him warning. Only yesterday, she had warned him. He always put her off until a further date, and now the rapture had taken place. He never thought it would come in his day. People had talked about it for generations, but it had not happened until today. And he and Lucille had not been ready. Lucille moaned softly as she regained consciousness. At least Jim went to the bathroom and came back with a glass of water and a wet towel. He lifted her head off the floor, bathed her face with the cool towel, and pressed the glass to her feverish lips. Then he picked her up and carried her back to bed as if she were a young child. He tried to console her as she came back to the realization of what had happened. I want my baby. Please, Jim, find my baby, she cried. Jim tried to tell her they could not. They could get right with God and go to be with Mother and baby Sue one day, but Lucille seemed not to hear. Jim called the doctor's office, but no one answered. Then he remembered the office hours had not yet begun. So he dialed the doctor's home. No one answered. What an awful uproar the world must be in, Jim thought. He decided to go to the drugstore and buy some sleeping tablets. It's not good for Lucille to be in a constant state of hysteria like this. Jim felt he Jim felt he would welcome death. He had to live for with his mother. What did he have to live for with his mom and baby gone? The radio in the kitchen was playing soft music. Then, like a bolt of lightning, a program was interrupted, and a highly agitated voice began to speak. We bring you further update of the catastrophic event that took place about 6 o'clock this morning. Thousands have disappeared from all over the nation and other countries too. Reports are still filtering in. Wide-eyed and breathless, Jim listened as the newscaster continued. One man said he and his wife awoke about 5 o'clock and everything was normal. He heard his wife praying about 5:30, as was her custom, and around 6 o'clock she put breakfast on the table. He was sitting at the table waiting for her to pour the coffee when suddenly a feeling came over him. He glanced down at his watch, and as he did, he felt a sweeping wind. When he looked up, the chair was empty and his wife gone. He could scarcely believe his eyes. She had been there just a moment before. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but his wife was still gone. She could not have gotten out that quickly. without his seeing her. He sat there puzzled, trying to figure it all out. She had disappeared as if by some kind of magic. He called her name and searched the house inside and out, but he could not find her. He thought maybe she was playing a joke on him, and so he went back to the table and tried to eat, but the feeling of uneasiness still lingered. He said it came over him like a flash. What had happened? The Son of God had come and taken his bride, the children of God. There were many other similar experiences described, but Jim didn't listen. He hurried out to the drugstore. His morning copy of the Alabaster Tribune lay on the porch, and with it a hastily printed additional front page. Jim picked it up, unrolled it. The words, "Thousands of people have mysteriously disappeared," danced before his eyes in screaming banner headlines. It somehow seemed unnatural to Jim for the birds still to be singing, the sun shining today. There was nothing to be happy about. Why shouldn't the whole world be dark and weeping with great sorrow? Just then, the front door of Alma Wilcox's house across the street opened, and there stood Alma, wild-eyed, shaken. "Jim!" she shrieked hysterically. "Come here at once. My daughters, twin boys, are missing. I can't find them anywhere. They stayed with me last night, and around 5 o'clock, when I was up to check on them, they were sleeping peacefully, but now they're gone. I've searched the house and I can't find a trace of them anywhere. The doors were bolted last night, and the children are too small to have climbed out of a window. Their clothes are still in the bedroom. I just tried to get the police, but the line is busy. Won't you please come and help me?" Jim stood still as a statue. Not a muscle twitched. After he recovered from the first moment of surprise that Alma Wilcox had been left behind, she was a church going woman, one who surely would have been ready for the rapture. Thoughts of her life began to pass through his mind as she rushed wildly on with her story. Alma Wilcox belonged to the same church Jim's mother had belonged to, but she never was that devout Christian his mother had been. If an evangelist would come to town for a revival campaign, she never had time to attend. When the ladies of the church met for prayer, she always had other plans. So it was for the midweek prayer service. When she did go to church, she didn't show much zeal for the lost. While the saints of God at the altar pointed the way of salvation to the lost, she usually sat and looked. Now, the rapture had taken place in Alma Wilcox in a lukewarm condition had been left behind. For those of you all who are tuning in, we are reading the book Raptured by Ernest Angley, and we're in chapter 3 on page 54. The rapture has taken place. "My God, woman, don't you know what has happened? The Lord has come." Alma's hands and arms shook, and her knees began to buckle beneath her. "No, it can't be true. Stop trying to fool me," she cried. "I'm still here. Wouldn't I be gone too?" As Jim saw the fear mingle with unbelief, he held up the paper he had been carrying so she could read the bold headlines covering three-fourths of the page. "Thousands of people have mysteriously disappeared." From her lips came the most pitiful wail Jim had ever heard from a human being. "My Lord, it's true. He has come and I've been left behind," She fell down to her knees, crying and praying as she had never prayed before. Oh God, how foolish I've been. Half heartedly I've served you, like Peter of old. I've fallen afar off. Why, oh why did I let the devil deceive me? Now it's happened. I'm left. Then, desperately clutching at straws, she thought, maybe it was not true after all. If she could find real saints of God who were not gone, then she would know. Rising to her feet in a great haste, she rushed through the gate and down the back alley to a little cabin where old Lily, the scrub woman, lived. Alma felt in her heart, if there ever were a true saint of God, surely Lily was one. The old cabin, neat as a pin, but unpainted, looked lonely and deserted this morning. Alma's heart pounded with fear as she approached the closed door. She rapped loudly, then waited anxiously. Everything was still. She could hear the loud ticking of the clock on the dresser inside. It seemed to be saying, "You're left behind. You're left behind." Oh, if only Lily would open the door and say, "Howdy, Miss Wilcox," in her deep Swedish voice. But there was no one answering. She almost imagined she heard a noise on the inside, but the door did not open. Lily was gone. Tears blinded her vision as she stumbled down the steps, back up the alley again. As she came around the side of her house, she saw Jim standing just where she had left him, staring into space. It seemed as if he had aged 15 years since yesterday. His shoulders, which had always been held straight, were stooped, now in despair. His hair was tousled and he looked extremely haggard. As she approached him, she tried to calm. "Jim, I just went over to Lily's cabin and she must have stepped out somewhere. She was not there." With this, she burst into tears, Jim just staring into space as if he had not heard. As reality began to penetrate through his daze, Jim took notice of his surroundings. He heard a loud knocking at the door down the street. Turning to see who it was, he saw Alma standing at the open door of Zelma Briggs. Jim knew the story of the rapture was being told to someone else. A scream pierced the air. Another soul had realized Jesus had come, and she had been left behind. Jim's mind was numb. He felt cold all over. Beads of icy sweat covered his forehead. As he approached Zelma's gate, she and Alma dashed out and down the sidewalk in front of him. They were clinging to each other as if the other meant life itself. Tortured eyes gleamed unbelievably out from horrified faces. Jim passed by houses with blinds still drawn and wondered if anyone had gone from them. What sadness there will be for those who still sleep, he thought, when they awake and discover what has taken place. Jim was so deep in thought that he did not notice the figure of a woman hurrying up the street toward him. And before he realized it, he had bumped into her, startled, and looked down into her eyes that seemed as if they had been to hell and back. Great agony was stamped upon the soul. "Have you seen my husband and baby? I can't find them anywhere," she wept. "I awoke this morning, they were both gone. My David is such a good boy." Something dreadful must have happened to him. Jim looked at her with eyes of pity. He knew she must be suffering. Must he tell her the truth? He tried to move his lips and speak the word rapture, but it wouldn't come. He unfolded his newspaper and without a word, he held the bold headline before her eyes. She stared at it, read it over several times before it seemed to penetrate her mind. Then suddenly a strangled scream bubbled from her lips and she stumbled to the sidewalk. Jim rushed on blindly, trying to fight back the tears. He had heard people try to tell what it would be like just after the rapture took place, but no one had ever been able to describe the helpless horror he was experiencing. Jim saw Alma Zelma hurrying up the steps of Reverend Hillary's home, the pastor of Fairview Church where Mother Collins attended. Both pounded frantically on the door. Jim waited, hoping against hope that the door would open and the dear old saint of God appear. He knew if Reverend Hillary were there, the rapture would not have taken place. After waiting at the gate for what seemed an eternity, Jim continued on down the street. There was no use in waiting any longer. Reverend Hillary was gone. At last, Jim came to the drugstore. No one was in except Bill, the druggist, who lived in a small apartment behind the store. Jim was his first customer. His grave face brightened as Jim walked in. Morning, Jim, he said cheerfully. How are you feeling this morning? Terrible, Jim managed to answer. What was wrong with Bill? How could anyone ask how a person was feeling on a morning like this? Bill noticed Jim's drawn face and his haunted eyes and asked, Jim Collins, what on earth has happened to you? You looked as if you were about ready to collapse. My baby and my mother have disappeared, Jim replied. Bill still Googled hide and asked, You're what? Jim held up the newspaper he was still carrying. And as Bill read the headlines, the bottle of medicine fell from his hands and crashed to the floor. You, you, you don't mean your baby and mother were in that number? Yes, that is exactly what I mean. Lucille is in a terrible condition, and I want some sleeping tablets to get her quieted. With trembling hands, Bill managed somehow to lift the sleeping tablets from the shelf. He, too, had been reared in a home where there were family altars and a silver haired mother who read God's word and possessed the blessed hope. She had died years ago, but he remembered one of her favorite scriptures from Paul's writing. Behold, I shew you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. At the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall rise, be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? 1 Corinthians 15:51 through 55. He felt just as surely as if he had been there and seen it happen. That his mother's grave had burst open when the Son of God had made his appearance in midair, and her body came forth in a new body to be reunited with the soul. If you're just tuning in, you are listening to the book called Raptured. This is chapter 3. If only he had been ready and could have been caught up with her. My God, he choked. I've strayed so far from mother's teaching that I've become like many others. I did not believe the Lord was really coming. Bill ran blindly out the door, leaving his store unattended and not caring. Gone! That word carried greater meaning than ever before. Bill tried to pray, but it was hard because he had not prayed in a long time. And the devil was there to taunt him for being left behind. After many futile efforts to pray, he finally gave up. The people in Noah's days who refused to heed the call and take refuge in the ark found themselves outside the closed door where the judgments of God poured down upon them. Now, like the people in Noah's day, the saints of God had been saved from destruction, and those left behind were in the tribulation period. Bill rushed through the town to the cemetery to his mother's last resting place. Breathless, he reached her grave, and with tears streaming down his cheeks like a river, he looked into an open grave. Mother had been resurrected, and he had failed to keep his promise. People passed Bill on the left and right, and as he walked back to the main part of town, some of them knew, but he did not bother to speak. There wasn't anything to say. Men, women, boys, and girls astonished, and astonishment written on their countenance, and fear in red rimmed eyes, were talking frantically to each other. Some stubbornly declared that they did not believe the Son of God had come, that somebody was trying to play a prank. But facts were facts and could not long be denied. Too many loved ones had disappeared for anyone to do away with the reality that something drastic had happened. Buses sped cheerlessly on their way. Horns honked as people rushed madly, hurrying, but going nowhere in particular. No one really cared whether they reached work that morning or not. Why should they? The luxuries of life, all they had counted dear, had worked willingly for, was worthless. Their zeal and enthusiasm gone. How disquieting it would be trying to work while thinking about coming home to an empty house where the children would be gone. Bill had forgotten all about his store. Nothing seemed to matter now, except that he had missed the rapture. He had missed the rapture. He had never imagined it would be like this just after the rapture took place. A woman talking to the policeman on the corner lifted pleading eyes, begging him to help her find her husband. For once, Bill was glad he had no close loved ones. He used to become lonely and many times had wished he had someone he could go home to after the day's work was done. But now he thought how sad it would be to have had someone so dear snatched from him as this woman's husband was snatched from her. Bill thought back to the terrible war days when the boys had gone away. He had gone to the station to see close friends off and had consoled many a loved one's heart as the train pulled out. But this morning, he had no consolation to give his friends and neighbors who were left behind. If only he could walk up to those mothers in great distress and give them hope that their loved ones would come back. But he knew he could not do that. They were gone, caught away to be with the Lord forever. That's page 61. And you were just listening to chapter 3 of the book Raptured. This month, for the month of April, I have pledged to read a book. And that book is Raptured by Ernest Angley. And guys, this book was written back in 1950. So nobody is in this book talking about cell phones or jump watching TV. They're talking about what was on the front page of the newspaper, right? And they're given an example of what it is like after people have been raptured or caught away, right? They're talking about the agony that they are experiencing as they look for their missing children and the saints of God who they knew to be saints. Missing, all gone. We've been reading. The trump has sounded. And if you pay attention, we had a young man who said his mother's grave was empty. It was empty. An open grave. He 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 said he went to her grave and it was open. Is the way it is being described in the book. And according to the gospel, these things are going to happen. He described it as the tribulation period. And so much happens during the tribulation period. Once that trumpet sounds, there's no way to go back and say, oh, let me get ready. Let me think about it. Let me I got another day. I got 30 more minutes. There's no way. We have artists who have tried to come up with ways of what it would look like. And he described an open grave as if the body had been exhumed. But it was the resurrection. Her body had been resurrected, just like the Bible said. And we are coming off the cups of Resurrection Sunday. We know that the Lord is no longer in the grave, He has risen. The question remains, are you ready? We will have chapter 4. I will share this with you. I'm going to stop the audio now so that we can try to at least keep this at a minimum.